time to reach out and cross boundaries of many different cultures and religions. And I think in this day and age, with the kind of troubles we've been having in the world, we need every kind of person like him that we can in the world to bring people together.
And one final note, during this special Mass, Cardinal Egan also talked about the Pope's great strength in surviving that assassination attempt and his great heart in forgiving the man who tried to kill him. Cardinal Egan saying, quote, "The pontiff lived his life as his Savior lived his." And Martha, Cardinal Egan will again officiate a special Mass tomorrow morning here at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Whether it's raining or not, we're probably expecting that one to be just as packed as this evening Mass was today. Back to you.
I'm sure it will be, Rebecca. Thank you so much. Rebecca Gomez. Well, perhaps nowhere is the loss felt more tonight than in Poland, where this man, this Pope, made the people so proud, so emboldened to have one of their own on the throne of St. Peter. The people in Krakow, where he was cardinal and near his hometown of Wadowice, have stood vigil over the last 2 days. A group stood at first light beneath the so-called papal window where then Archbishop Karol Wojtyła lived before he became the Pope. Amy Kellogg with a Fox Report live from Krakow. Amy.
That's all right, Martha. And the prayers continue here in Krakow outside the Archbishop's residence as we speak. And it's a bitter cold night, Martha, but people are still out. The feeling runs so deep here. Of course, the crowds aren't like what they were earlier, but this courtyard is just a sea of candles. The papal flags at the Archbishop's residence are draped with black ribbons. And when the priest here tonight announced that Pope John Paul II had died, people instantly fell to their knees, and you could hear the sobs and the crying, young and old. People just broke down and then were terribly silent. It was quite dramatic. A nun even lost consciousness. So great was her grief, and she had to be carried out of here on a stretcher. Now, the Archbishop and Cardinal of Krakow, who is a close personal friend of the Pope's, read Mass here after the announcement. And just before that, the haunting bells of the nearby majestic Wawel Castle tolled in acknowledgement of the passing of the Pope. They only sound on very important occasions. Archbishop Franciszek Macharski said the bells tolled for new life and not death. Of course, resurrection, a theme central to Catholicism. The crowds here during the Mass were at least as large, if not larger, than they were during the preceding vigil. The Archbishop, in his remarks to the faithful here, thanked God for giving them the Pope. The Pope has been a source of national pride for Poles, and as a great patriot, stood by them throughout the Nazi occupation, the communist regime, and then the transition to democracy in this country. And Martha, you can hear the singing continues at this hour. One of the themes that's being perpetuated by both the faithful and some of the clergy members who have spoken tonight is that the Pope is with us still. He's watching over us. And the Cardinal, in some of his closing remarks at his Mass a short while ago, beseeched the Pope, asked him, said, please stand by us more than before. Stand by us as you have all of these years. That is the latest from Krakow. Martha, back to you.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. Amy Kellogg tonight in Krakow, Poland. And a Mass is scheduled at St. Peter's Square for tomorrow morning at 10:30 Rome time. That's 4:30 East Coast time. There's a live shot as tens of thousands have been gathering and continue to gather. They are paying their respects to the late pontiff. Joining us now from our Washington newsroom is moral theologian Pia de Solemni. She met the Pope 4 times. Dr. Solemni, tell me a little bit about your experiences when you actually met the Pope. I understand that he gave you a medal.
It was an award that he gave me for my doctoral work. There was a competition that year for work in theology, and I had the opportunity to submit my dissertation, which was the development of a Catholic feminism, one that would be consistent with the tradition of the Church and at the same time answering a lot of the same questions that modern feminism and gender theories have asked.
Well, you tackled in that a question that has clearly risen for so many women in this country and indeed around the world. The Pope, who was so loved, was not one, though, to give women more any sort of more leadership roles in the traditional sense in terms of making them priests. That was something that he was against. Tell us a little bit about how you sort of reconciled those two sides of his papacy.
Well, I mean, first of all, if you go to the Catechism, the first definition of a priest is servant. So you have to be careful in terms of seeing the priest as a leader. He has elevated women in the lay world. For example, Marianne Glendon is the head of the Pontifical Academy for Social Sciences. She's a Harvard professor of law. He has clearly expressed the fact that women should be active in every level of society, that they should be active in the professional world. And I think what he did that was so unique was that conservatives and liberals both have talked about women always as something, as a mother, as a lover, as a worker, but rarely about women as women. And he said, look, whatever you do, you're a mother, you're a wife, you are a professional, whatever it is that you do, you bring something to that, whatever it is that you do, insofar as you're a woman. And he encouraged women in that. And I think that is something that's utterly unique to his papacy.
That's so interesting. I was reading today one statement that jumped out at me by his spokesman, Joaquin Navarro-Valls, who said, this is a pope who asks us, who are you? Not what do you want to do?
Exactly.
Which hits on what you're saying, doesn't it?
Exactly. I hope so. And I recall, you know, back in 1995 when we had the Beijing conference, the UN conference on women, you know, there was a lot of conversation. This was going to focus on women, and the conversation was all about, quote unquote, reproductive health and abortion. And it was this Pope who said, look, any document that is supposed to talk about the intelligence of women should spend at least as much time talking about their literacy as it does talking about their fertility. And I think he was one of the main voices to move the conversation of women's issues and women's rights out of the area of reproductive rights.
Very interesting. You know, when you look at that part of this question, it was just continuing in his consistency. He did not encourage, you know, a sort of cafeteria Catholicism, as it's been called. He believed in the sanctity of life and made no bones about it, did he?
No, not at all. And I think, you know, if you look carefully at his writings, and this is what I think we're going to spend at least 100 years doing before we really get to the core of it. In 1994, he wrote the letter on the ordination of priests, and he specifically said that women cannot be ordained. And from that point, he stopped talking about women in priestly ordination. From that point on, he started talking specifically about the role of women in society, about the feminine genius, and about the role of Mary, the Mother of God. One of his encyclicals, Faith and Reason, which talks about the relationship between philosophy and theology, he holds Mary up as the paradigm of all philosophers. And it's a text that not much time has been given to, and I think we'll have that time in the future.
And he was indeed so devoted to the Virgin Mother. In fact, one of the quotes that I read after September 11th, he said, you know, Mary opens her arms to the dead, and I'm paraphrasing here, but, you know, and she comforts those who suffer with the families that are left behind. She was always very prominent in all of his teachings, wasn't she?
Absolutely. And his motto, Totus Tuus, that was, I am all yours, but through Mary. And he saw Mary as the way. She was the one, in a sense, who was leading him, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, we study the Gospels, and we know that there was one person there who understood everything that was going on and who was always present, and that was Jesus' mother. And she was there from the beginning to the very end. And it's very natural to understand that by seeking her friendship, seeking her love as a mother, that we would be able to come to know Jesus even better.
You know, as we enter the process where the cardinals will join in Rome, 117 of them, and begin that process of choosing a new pope, there will be lots of speculation as to whether or not they will choose someone who is more, quote, liberal, I guess, in the sense that we were talking about earlier.
Sure.
What do you think in terms of the likelihood of that happening?
I can't say. I think that, you know, the one thing that we can be certain is the Pope is going to be Catholic. And I think it's George Weigel who said, you know, the Pope is not a politician in a white suit. And I think John Paul himself, you can't really pin him down as liberal or conservative. He put forth what was Catholic. And that ultimately doesn't break down into liberal or conservative. It completely transcends it.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Pia Di Saleni. Appreciate it. Well, by all accounts, the Pope was an extraordinary man whose devotion and ability to effect political and social change has left an indelible mark on history. Throughout his reign, the pontiff easily relating to both the powerful and those who were so without power. He made lasting connections all along the way. Fox News correspondent Todd Connor takes a look back at John Paul II's remarkable life.
When the white smoke went up from a chimney over St. Peter's Square on October 16, 1978, the world's 950 million Catholics had a new pope, Karol Wojtyła. He was little known. He was not Italian. He was from Poland, a country suffering under the thumb of Soviet rule. Yet from the beginning, it was clear that this would be a new journey for Roman Catholics. John Paul II quickly stepped outside the imposing walls of Vatican City to take his message directly to his people. Deliberately, his first trip was to Mexico, a poor Catholic country. But it was his second trip that electrified the wary world. On June 2, 1979, he exited a plane and kneeled to kiss the ground of his native country. Millions of his countrymen took to the streets in mass defiance of their communist rulers. Even as he sternly faced down Soviet domination, John Paul gently tended to his vast audience, which flocked to be near him. His weekly public appearances drew so many thousands that they had to be moved outside to St. Peter's Square. And it was there in May 1981 that a gunman tried to kill him. The abdominal wound nearly killed him, but the Pope refused to curtail his travels, agreeing only to ride in a bulletproof vehicle quickly dubbed the Popemobile. And he used his experience as another lesson, visiting his assailant, Mehmed Ali Agha, in prison to publicly forgive him. This Pope, a former actor during the Nazi occupation of Poland, knew how to hold his audience. Crowds were often surprised and delighted by his sly humor.
Cardinal Cook says, enough.
His ability to laugh at himself.
Scrapers.
When age and illness had stolen his once robust health, John Paul made one more pilgrimage to a communist country, Cuba. There, he celebrated masses for thousands and held private talks with a former Catholic, Fidel Castro. It was a poignant trip for the globe-trotting Pope, who visited dozens of countries in his time, often singling out the poorest nations to draw attention to his sermons of poverty and peace.
No more war never again.
But that plea for peace sometimes evaded him within his own walls. John Paul ruled in a difficult time that followed the sweeping change of Vatican II, when the Church threw open its doors to new thinking and abandoned the strict rites of the past. John Paul was increasingly caught between the forces of change and tradition. During his time, parish priests, nuns, and even bishops in the United States and Western Europe voiced their doubts about long-standing church theology. John Paul never wavered in his support of the all-male priesthood, and he codified his opposition to abortion, divorce, homosexuality, birth control, and sex outside of marriage.
The powerful always need to remember that they owe their position to God.
As the end of the century approached, a new beginning took place at the Vatican. December 24th was the first day of the Great Jubilee, a year-long birthday party marking 2,000 years since the birth of Christ. For Pope John Paul II, who spent many years preparing for this Jubilee, it was the chance to unite Catholics around the world. In the year 2000, the Holy Father took one more historic journey to the Holy Land. The high point of the trip for Jews was during a visit to the nation's Holocaust Memorial. There, the Pope met with Holocaust survivors. This was a sharp break from the past when the Church taught that Jews deserved to suffer for killing Christ.
I assure the Jewish people, that the Catholic Church is deeply saddened by the hatred, acts of persecution, and displays of anti-Semitism directed against the Jews by Christians.
These words may not have been a full apology, but they went further than any other gesture in the Church's history. John Paul II, a simple man in a complicated world. Throughout his reign, he walked an easy line between the powerful and the powerless. He was comfortable in the company of great leaders, but most happy in the embrace of his flock. Todd Connor, Fox News.
All right, there's a look, a live shot tonight at St. Peter's at the Vatican, which we have been watching so closely over the past couple of days. In a different mood there tonight as this acceptance to some degree starts to sink in that indeed the Pope has died, as was announced around 10 o'clock, a little before 10 o'clock in Italy this evening. Pope John Paul II is gone from this world, but the strength of his legacy will indeed live on in history. Tens of thousands of people filling St. Peter's Square over the past few days, as I said, from Rome to every corner of the world tonight. People of faith reflecting on an extraordinary man. Joining us from our Washington newsroom is Father John Langan, professor at Georgetown University. Father Langan, good to have you with us tonight.
It's good to be here.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the very unusual circumstances under which this Pope originally became a priest. He was ordained in secret. And talk to us a little bit about how that might have informed the rest of his life and indeed the work that he did in Eastern Europe.
Yeah. Well, I think it's clear that he grew up in a situation of great suffering. There wouldn't be the kind of secure environment or a solidly Catholic environment that most popes have grown up in. And so I think that accounts for a lot of his energy, his sense of the importance of reaching out beyond the people that were already, shall we say, comfortable with the church. And I think that's a very important aspect of his ministry. I think also he knew that his country was in the hands of people committed to an alien ideology, and that a lot of the issues had to be worked through philosophically. That the traditional hold of the church on the Polish people was something the communists were very keen to break. And he had to be engaged in opposing that in new and creative ways. So I think that was really very fundamental to his ministry, and the fact that he was always willing to move out beyond the standard Catholic framework, whether that was doing ecumenical prayer services, whether that was going to the mosque and the synagogue. There was a sense of reaching out and of adventure that marked him.
You talk about his familiarity with people of other religions, and in reading about his childhood, he was raised in a neighborhood in Poland where a lot of Jewish people lived. I think the owner of their building, of his dad and his, was Jewish, and a number of his friends that he played soccer with. Talk to us a little bit about how that, and in fact it's been said that maybe since St. Peter, he was the Pope who was the most sort of familiar with his Jewish brethren, so to speak.
Well, I think that's quite true, and we forget how interwoven Jews were in the life of Poland before the tragic events of the Holocaust. And the fact is that John Paul was able to understand and respond to Jews as individual people whom he knew, and he would not, as a result, fall victim to the kind of blindness when people start discussing Jews as a body or a group to be regarded with suspicion. I mean, he had enough firsthand experience to counteract that very negative stereotyping.
He did have a difficult childhood. He lost his mother and his brother, who he loved very much at a young age, and then his father. So he was really so much alone in the world by the age of 20. And I read that he was hit by a truck at one point, walking home from his work at the factory, and was taken in and cared for. Tell us a little bit about, about his background and what made him who he is in that regard.
Well, I think that one of the major themes in his preaching was and his ministry, and also in his witness in this last phase, was the importance of suffering, the value of it, and the importance of compassion. And this was something that he knew in his bones. I mean, this was not simply something that was a matter of trying to cope with problems that happened to other people.
Father Langan, forgive me, we're going to just go right now to New York, where Cardinal Egan is speaking, and we want to listen to him for a moment.
You touch the hearts of millions. And I've mentioned to some of you that I knew him very well. I was one of those that guarded the cardinals at the last two conclaves. There's a tribunal in Rome called the Tribunal of the Sacred Roman Rota, and I was one of the 14 judges of the Rota. And the 14 judges were to protect the cardinals. How much protection we could have offered is anybody's guess. But it gave me an opportunity to see two conclaves up close, the one for John Paul I and then for John Paul II. Shortly after I was with the Holy Father for the announcement of his being named to the papacy, he came to visit the office where I worked, went and saw each one of us in our office, put us very much at our ease, and was simply wonderful to us. Then as the years went on, I had a chance to work with him, had many happy days with him, many serious meetings with him, and I've always seen him as a kind of second father, as I mentioned tonight at the end of the Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And so I tell you that tonight I'm in mourning for the loss of my second father, but at the same time I rejoice that he has finished the race which he ran so very well. And I know that he's in the hands of the Eternal Father, and I know as well that the Mother of Jesus Christ welcomed him in a very special way. For I never knew anyone whose devotion to Mary was deeper than his. And so I express the fact that I'm sharing the sorrow of Greater New York, of the nation, of the world, but at the same time I thank the Lord for taking this wonderful man, this wonderful priest, this wonderful bishop to himself. And so that said, it's your turn. They're going to say your name real loud, and then we'd be delighted to hear from you. Go ahead, please.
Stacy Sager, Channel 7.
I didn't hear it, those.
Stacy Sager, Channel 7.
Very good. Thank you, Stacy.
I think a lot of people just wish to know your plans for the coming days as well, when you plan to go to Rome, and what the plans are for Masses at St. Patrick's.
Great. All right, tomorrow, being Sunday, we'll have the 10:15 Mass at St. Patrick's, and I will be there, and I will be the one who celebrates it. And I will, as they say today, deliver the homily as well. There will be the usual Mass schedule at the cathedral with one change. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we will have a Mass in Polish. And I'll preside at it, and we will have a priest who is very well known to the Holy Father and well known to New York celebrate that Mass. And so that'll be at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Okay. Then on Monday, we will have a Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral in which I will be the celebrant in Spanish, and our auxiliary bishop, Bishop Iriondo, will deliver the homily, the sermon, as they sometimes said years ago. The next day, which is Tuesday, we very likely will have a Mass for everyone at the cathedral at 10 o'clock. And shortly after that Mass, I think I will be getting on an airplane to go to Rome. And I will be in Rome for the funeral, and that's the issue right now. The funeral is to be within 4 to 6 days after the Holy Father passes. But I don't know whether it's 4, 5, or 6. So we'll get on the airplane and get ourselves across, and I will probably stay at the Pontifical North American College on the Janiculum Hill near the Vatican. And then at a certain point, they'll have us go over to a new facility that they call the Casa Santa Marta, where I heard this afternoon there are 120 rooms. And so there are only 117 of us, so I think we'll each get a room. Someone was kidding me before that it would be like the seminary, we'd be doubling up, but I've been informed by no less than the Archbishop of Washington that there are 120 rooms and 117 of us, so that's where I'll be. Is that okay, Stacy? Thank you. Please. You're right here in front. Say your name if you would.
Andy Newman from the New York Times.
Andy Newman from the New York Times.
Yes, sir. Given how closely you worked with this Pope, have you thought at all about what it's going to be like once the new Pope is chosen, working for someone who you're not as familiar with and who doesn't know your work as well?
Well, anytime you've worked with someone and had a pleasant relationship with someone, you sort of feel you have an in, you know, that everything is going along very well in the relationship with the boss. And
all right, we have been watching Cardinal Egan here in New York, who has been expressing his own sorrow, saying that Pope John Paul II was like a second father to him, and also outlining some of his plans, as many cardinals, all 117 of them all around the world, are doing right now as they make their arrangements to head to the Vatican to get started on the next step of this all-important process. But not time quite to get to that as of yet, as we continue to think and to learn tonight and to watch this emotional outpouring that we are seeing from people all over the United States for the death of a friend half a world away. In our nation's capital, even a downpour today could not keep crowds away from filling the largest church in the Americas, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. And President Bush attending Mass tonight just a few miles away. Our team coverage continues tonight with national correspondent Catherine Herridge, who is in Washington outside St. Matthew's Cathedral, where the president was tonight. Hi, Catherine.
Good evening, Martha. As you said, very poor weather here in Washington, torrential rain, but that was not enough to keep people away. There were large crowds at St. Matthew's behind me for Mass, also at the Basilica in the northeast part of the city. As you mentioned, the president was here at St. Matthew's earlier this evening to attend Mass led by the Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal McCarrick, who told us earlier today that Pope John Paul II will be sorely missed because he was so much a part of the Church's everyday mission.
One of the first things I thought was in the Mass now today, having for 27 years said for John Paul our Pope and whoever is the bishop, we won't be able to say that now because we don't have a John Paul our Pope anymore.
St. Matthew's Cathedral has a special connection to Pope John Paul II. He led Mass at the cathedral in 1979 during his trip to Washington, D.C. We heard Cardinal McCarrick speak of the Holy Father 4 times today here in Washington, and he had 2 central messages. The first was that the Pope believed that the gap between rich and poor nations had to be closed, and that this was a message the Cardinal said was heard by great leaders around the world, including President Bush. He also said the Pope thought it was essential that there was a dialogue between faiths. The Pope had reached out to Muslims, to Jews, to Hindus, and to Buddhists. Cardinal McCarrick said the Pope had left his mark on the Catholic Church.
Anyone who gave his life so totally, so completely, so beautifully to other people, you know, has to have a great place in heaven.
Cardinal McCarrick will leave Washington for Rome on Sunday. And if there was one message he had today, it was that part of the Pope's legacy is